She mocked an elderly man in a wheelchair at the bank counter, unaware he quietly owned the entire branch. Less than an hour later, she was unemployed. The automatic doors of Guardian State Bank's West Haven branch slid open at 9:03 a.m. morning. Light streamed across the freshly polished floors as 63-year-old Elliot Dandridge rolled in silently in his wheelchair. He wore a slate gray windbreaker, an old baseball cap pulled low over his brow, and a calm, unreadable expression. He didn't look important, and that was exactly the point. Elliot slowly wheeled around the lobby, taking it all in before approaching the reception desk. The bank had just opened. Most employees were still sipping coffee and adjusting their badges. A few customers waited quietly, hunched over their phones. The air smelled of toner and lemon floor cleaner. "Excuse me," Elliot said gently. "May I speak with the branch manager, please?" Behind the desk, Megan Alcott barely looked up. Mid-30s, platinum blonde. Her sharp bob framed her face like it meant business. Thick mascara. No smile. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked flatly, barely glancing at him. "No, I don't," Elliot replied politely. "But I'd appreciate—" She cut him off with a raised hand. Without acknowledging him further, she turned to a colleague and muttered under her breath, "Betty's here to cash someone else's check or complain about something we can't fix." She didn't speak loudly, but loud enough. A few customers looked up. A teenage boy glanced uncomfortably at his mother. The mother frowned, unsure. She'd heard right. Elliot blinked slowly, tilting his head, not in shock, but in quiet calculation. He hadn't expected perfection from this branch, but this was blatant. "I can wait," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "But I'd still like to speak with the manager." Megan sighed dramatically as though he'd asked her to scrub the entire bank. "Sir, unless you're a client, the manager doesn't have time for walk-ins." "I'm not here to make a withdrawal," Elliot said evenly. "Then what are you here for?" she snapped. "Because I don't really have the patience today for— Is there a problem?" A deep voice echoed across the lobby. Eduardo, a client services representative in his late 40s, had entered from the hallway. His blue name tag caught the light as he frowned toward the scene. "I've got it, Eduardo," Megan said dismissively, not even looking at him. Eduardo's voice dropped. "Miss Alcott, you might want to lower your tone." "I said I've got it," she barked back. Elliot glanced at Eduardo, nodding slightly. A silent thanks. Then he turned back to Megan with the patience of someone who'd spent a lifetime teaching others how to behave. "Please," he said once more, "just the manager. That's all I'm asking." Megan rolled her eyes, slapped a clipboard down in front of him. "Fine. Write your name. Maybe someone will see you in an hour." But Elliot didn't reach for the clipboard. Instead, he opened a sleek leather folder resting on his lap. The room grew still. The mother and son in the waiting area exchanged looks. Megan leaned lazily on the counter, pretending not to notice. She turned slightly toward Eduardo, muttering just loud enough, "Some people think demanding attention gets them somewhere." Eduardo said nothing. He simply stood, arms crossed, watching. Elliot was in no rush. He wasn't rattled. In fact, he looked like a man all too familiar with scenes like this. He slowly slid a folded document across the counter and tapped it once. "I'd appreciate it if you could give this to your branch manager," he said. Megan scoffed. "Sir, we don't accept random paperwork. If it's a complaint, there's an online form." "It's not a complaint," Elliot interrupted quietly. Elliot responded calmly, "It's documentation." "I already told you," Megan interrupted, her voice rising. "You're not on the schedule, so unless you're here for a deposit or to see a banker, you'll have to wait like everyone else." A quiet murmur stirred from the client area near the coffee station. A woman in medical scrubs holding a takeaway cup shifted her stance and whispered to the man beside her, "She's talking to him like he's a child." Elliot didn't need defending, but the room was beginning to shift. People were watching. Still, oblivious, Megan pushed the paper aside with a manicured finger and gave Elliot a tight, insincere smile. "If you're not going to sign in, I'll have to ask you to move away from the desk." Elliot leaned back slightly, not retreating, but measuring the moment. He turned to Eduardo. "Would you mind taking a look at this, please?" Without hesitation, Eduardo stepped forward. Megan tried to intercept him. "There's no need," but Eduardo raised a hand, not to Elliot, but to her. A calm, firm signal. He picked up the paper, scanned it, and his eyes widened. This is from corporate," he said. Megan blinked. "What?" Eduardo didn't answer immediately. He stepped back, eyes scanning the document again. "I think you should call Brian," he said firmly. "For what? He's with—" "Now," Eduardo repeated with emphasis. She hesitated, but the look he gave her left no room for debate. With a visible sigh, she reached for the phone behind the desk, punched in a few numbers, and turned her back to the room as she spoke in a muffled tone. Elliot didn't watch her. His eyes were scanning the lobby, taking in the sudden shift. The once apathetic clients were now visibly alert. An older man in a flannel jacket gave Elliot a small nod. A woman clutched her purse a bit tighter but didn't look away. The teenage boy who'd come with his mother had pulled out his phone, not to record, just to text. But he didn't take his eyes off Elliot. Megan hung up and muttered, "He'll be out when he's free," stepping away from the desk like she wanted to vanish into the background. Elliot turned to Eduardo. "Thank you." Eduardo gave a slight nod. "We don't usually get visits from corporate. I didn't recognize you, sir." "That's the idea," Elliot replied. Megan heard him that time. Her face stiffened. "Corporate," she repeated, this time with uncertainty. "You work for Guardian State?" Elliot didn't respond. He simply turned to face the room again, resting his hands lightly on his wheelchair. His calm posture remained, but something in his silence commanded attention. Megan began pacing behind the counter, arms folded, tapping her nails against her sleeve. The confidence she'd shown earlier had turned fragile. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't asked for clarification. She was waiting, hoping whatever this was would resolve quietly. At the back, Terrence Holland, one of the newer tellers, had paused mid-transaction. He apologized to the elderly woman he was helping and stepped back to his station. He had seen it all, how Megan spoke to Elliot, how she dismissed Eduardo. Terrence reached into his pocket and opened his camera app. He hesitated, then tapped record. Across the room, the teenage boy whispered to his mom, "Is he like an undercover boss?" His mom glanced at Elliot, then at Megan, then back at her son. "He doesn't need to be undercover," she replied. "Look at how quiet she got." They weren't wrong. Megan had gone completely silent. Her eyes were fixed on the hallway, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. She shot Eduardo a glare, but he'd returned to his desk, typing away as if she didn't exist. Just then, the front doors opened again. A sharply dressed woman in a navy power suit entered, paused as she assessed the atmosphere, then locked eyes with Elliot. She walked directly to the desk. Megan perked up. "Hi, welcome to Guardian State. I'll be with you in just a—" "I'm not here for a transaction," the woman interrupted. Her name was Judith Emery, a longtime regional investment client of the bank. Megan recognized her but couldn't immediately. "Place her." Judith stepped closer to Elliot and leaned in just slightly to speak privately. "Mr. Dandridge," she said warmly, "I wasn't expecting to see you today." Elliot offered a small smile. Neither was she. Judith straightened and locked eyes with Megan. "Is that so?" Megan opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes flicked between Judith and Elliot, trying to process. "I was told you'd be visiting sometime this month," Judith said to Elliot. "I'm glad I happened to be here today." She glanced around. "Looks like you're already making quite the impression." Elliot chuckled softly. Unintended but noted, Judith took a seat near the window and opened her planner. Terrence, still recording, stopped. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a revelation. The atmosphere in the bank had shifted. Megan slowly made her way back to the desk. She moved differently now, more measured, less certain. "I didn't know," she said quietly, staring at the edge of the desk. "I didn't know who you were." "That's the point," Elliot replied, still calm. She hesitated. "If I had known," Elliot gently interrupted. "Would you have treated me any differently if I looked the same, but wasn't someone important?" The question lingered in the air like a cloud no one could disperse. The room went completely still. Terrence glanced at Eduardo, who now watched silently from across the room. Megan said nothing, and then the hallway door clicked. Her last chance to recover was walking toward her. The door opened, and Brian Covington stepped out. In his early 50s, he had the build of a former linebacker, salt and pepper hair, and an air of authority. His tie was loosened, and his glasses hung from his shirt pocket. He scanned the room quickly, reading the tension instantly. His eyes landed on Megan first. Her posture stiffened. She didn't speak. Then his gaze turned to Elliot. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed across Brian's face, not panic exactly, but something close. "Mr. Dandridge," he said, voice steady. Brian stepped forward, his voice low but respectful. Elliot gave a slight nod. The temperature at the front desk seemed to drop several degrees. Brian moved closer, extending his hand. Elliot reached out and shook it firmly and steadily. "I wasn't informed you'd be visiting this branch today," Brian said carefully. "I prefer to keep things straightforward," Elliot replied. "Surprise visits help me see the reality." Brian nodded slowly, clearly understanding. Megan glanced between them, now visibly confused. "Wait, so he's not just some corporate visitor?" Brian turned to her with a tight expression. "Megan, we'll talk later." She hesitated, swallowing hard. "I just didn't—" He cut her off with a glance. Calm, not harsh, but unmistakably final. "Mr. Dandridge, would you like to come into my office?" Brian asked. Elliot gestured toward the counter. "I've already submitted a document that should explain my presence." Brian took the folded paper from Eduardo, who had silently handed it over, quickly scanned it, clenched his jaw, then stepped. "Aside. Please follow me." Elliot nodded, turning his chair toward the hallway. But halfway there, he paused and looked back at Megan. "I assume this branch has cameras?" he asked. Without hesitation, Brian answered. "Yes, sir. 6 cameras, all synced to the internal server." "Good," Elliot said. "I want to review this morning's footage before we proceed." Brian's expression tightened. "Absolutely." Megan stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Dandridge, I didn't mean anything by it. I just didn't know." Elliot studied. "Her. Not angrily, not cruelly, but directly. You meant exactly what you said. That's the problem." He wheeled himself down the hallway, leaving Megan shrinking behind the counter. Judith, still seated by the window, closed her planner and shot Megan a look that spoke of quiet disappointment. Terrence put his phone away. He no longer needed to record. The truth was louder than any video clip. In the hallway, Brian opened the door to his office and stepped aside for Elliot. "Would you like coffee or water?" Brian asked. "No, thank you," Elliot replied. Brian sat behind his desk, logged into his laptop, and said, "I'll cue up the footage now." They sat silently, the computer's hum filling the room. Brian tapped a few keys, rewinding the security footage to 9:03 a.m. Elliot watched the scene unfold. His entrance, Megan's words, Eduardo's reaction, the crowd shifting. "I need a copy of this sent to legal," Elliot said. "Already done," Brian replied without missing a beat. Elliot glanced at him. Brian nodded once. The moment Eduardo handed me that paper, I knew, Elliot said softly. I'm not here to fire anyone, Brian said, rubbing the back of his neck, looking tired. There are things we've overlooked. I've let Megan slide before. Sharp tongue, decent performance, but today was different. Elliot said nothing. The footage kept playing, Megan's voice clear as crystal. Outside the office, the lobby was stirring. A silent message was passing from person to person. Things were changing, and it wouldn't stop with Megan. Back in the lobby, the usual noise didn't return. People spoke in hushed tones, the quiet after a line is crossed. Everyone had witnessed, something they shouldn't have, but no one was pretending anymore. Megan remained at the counter, arms crossed tightly, glancing toward the hallway like a student awaiting the principal's verdict. The confident air she wore earlier had vanished. Her jaw moved slightly, as if chewing on invisible words, searching for anything to undo what had just happened. Terrence stood near the phone booths, fiddling with a paperclip. He wanted to return to his desk, to the familiar rhythm of deposits and transfers, but something kept him rooted, maybe curiosity, maybe something heavier. He looked at Eduardo, who remained, steadfast. Their eyes met, and Terrence whispered, "Is this really happening?" Eduardo nodded once, every bit of it. Behind them, Judith stood, smoothing her skirt. She walked to the waiting area and addressed the room, not loudly, but with quiet authority. "For those wondering," she said, "that man isn't just part of corporate." Heads turned, jaws dropped. Someone whispered from the back, "No way." Judith shrugged. "I've worked with him. Brilliant investor. Private, doesn't talk much. But when he does..." She left the sentence unfinished, needing no further explanation. One of the older clients, Mr. Fairley, who had banked here for 20 years, finally spoke. "He lets her talk to him like that and just waits." Judith nodded. "That's how he works. He watches before he acts." Megan whipped her head around. "This is crazy," she said, half laughing. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just following protocol." No one answered. No one said a word. Megan looked toward Terrence, maybe hoping for backup. He looked away. She glanced at Eduardo. He didn't flinch. "We both heard what you said," Eduardo said calmly. "You know I didn't mean it like that," she shot back, her voice rising. "It was just a joke." "Were you laughing?" Eduardo asked quietly. She didn't answer. The hallway door opened again. Brian stepped out first, holding a small folder under his arm. Elliot followed, his hands resting on the rims of his wheels, expression unreadable. Brian walked straight to Megan. "Come with me, please," he said. "Why? What are you..." She stopped herself. Something in his tone told her this wasn't a conversation. They disappeared into the back. The lobby fell silent again. Elliot scanned the room. He said nothing, made no gesture. He just looked at the faces, some embarrassed, some curious, a few ashamed. Slowly, he wheeled over to Terrence. "You were recording earlier," Elliot said, not as an accusation, but simply stating a fact. Terrence cleared his throat. "Yeah, I thought it might help if she denied it." "You can delete it," Elliot replied. Terrence blinked in surprise. "There's no need," Elliot added. "The lesson is already clear." Terrence nodded quietly and deleted the clip from his phone. "I wasn't sure what to do. She outranks me and I didn't want to get involved." "You handled it well," Elliot said. "The hard part isn't speaking up. It's knowing how to stay calm." As the truth unfolded before them, a teenage boy whispered, "He's not what I expected." His mother smiled. "That's exactly the point, baby. People never are," she said. Elliot didn't turn around, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. Meanwhile, in the back office, a very different conversation was about to start. One that would leave Megan with few options. Brian closed the door gently behind them. Megan stood frozen in the middle of the office, as if the floor might give way beneath her. She didn't sit or speak, arms still crossed, but this was no longer confidence. It was a shield. Brian placed the folder on the desk and opened it carefully. Inside were printed surveillance stills taken just minutes earlier, her face appearing in every one. "I want to be very clear," he said. "This isn't just a review, this is documentation." Megan's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "You're not serious. I'm not playing." Brian responded calmly. "Do you realize how many people saw what happened out there?" "I didn't know who he was," she repeated, desperation creeping into her voice. "If I had known—" "Stop," Brian interrupted flatly. She blinked. He tapped his pen on the desk. "Do you honestly believe it's acceptable to speak to anyone that way? Do you think the problem was that you didn't know he was corporate, or that he was an owner?" "I didn't mean it," she muttered. Brian leaned back. "You meant every word. You just didn't mean to get caught." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked smaller now, less composed. The cracks in her armor were showing. Brian leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you understand the position you've put this entire branch in? That man didn't come here to fire anyone. He came to observe, and all you gave him was a show he won't forget." "I can apologize publicly. To him. To everyone," she said, grasping for a way out. Brian didn't respond. "Do you think an apology can erase how you treated someone you thought had no power?" She looked down. He continued, "I've had complaints about your tone before, clients, even staff. I let it slide because you moved numbers and followed procedures. But that ends now." Megan's throat tightened. "You're really letting me go." Brian folded his hands. "Not because you told me to, because I should have done it sooner." She stared at him, searching for even the smallest sign of mercy. There was none, not anymore. "I need your badge and login credentials," he said. She hesitated. "Too long." "Megan," he said again. Finally, she unclipped her name tag and placed it on the desk with trembling hands, then silently typed her deactivation code into the company iPad. When she finished, she looked up. "He humiliated me." "No," Brian said calmly. "You did that to yourself." She took a deep breath, turned, and left without another word. Outside, the office. Elliot sat quietly by the front desk. Judith had returned to her seat. The room had fallen into that strange hush again, but no one left. When Megan reappeared, badge gone, coat folded over her arm, the atmosphere shifted, not with cheers or gasps, but with quiet acknowledgement. She didn't look at anyone, didn't speak, didn't meet a single eye. The door clicked softly behind her. Elliot glanced at Brian. "All done?" Brian nodded once. "I'd like to speak." "To the team," Elliot said. Brian looked toward the staff lounge. "I'll bring them in." He disappeared for a few moments and returned, followed by 6 employees. Eduardo, Terrence, a young woman from the loans desk, 2 tellers, and the janitor. They formed a quiet semicircle near the waiting area, uncertain what to expect. Elliot didn't stand. He remained seated as when he first arrived, but when he finally spoke, his voice carried across the room like someone who had held back for years. Before he even spoke his first sentence, everyone felt it. This wasn't about punishment. It was about something much bigger. Elliot looked at the staff gathered before him, not with anger or scorn, but with the quiet weight of someone who'd lived long enough to understand how people truly work. His hands rested gently on the arms of his chair, and when he spoke, there was no performance, only truth. "I didn't come here today to trap anyone," he began. "I didn't come to catch someone making a mistake or to fire anyone. That's not my role." No one moved. "I come every few months to visit our branches. I don't announce it. I don't wear a suit. I just show up and watch." Elliot asked simple questions, not to test anyone's banking knowledge, but to see how people were treated when they seemed to have nothing to offer. Terrence lowered his gaze. The woman from Loans shifted nervously, and even Eduardo looked like he was holding his breath. Today, Elliot continued, I wasn't treated like a client. I wasn't treated like a man. I wasn't even treated like a human being. I was spoken to like a problem, like an inconvenience. He paused, then added, the only reason that changed was when Megan realized I had power. The room fell silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, but one heavy enough to make everyone think about what they would have done if they were behind the desk. I've spent most of my adult life being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, Elliot said calmly, and that's okay. I don't need attention. I've built my life quietly without needing validation. He shifted his gaze to Terrence. But you saw something wasn't right. You pressed record. You didn't say a word, but you knew it mattered. Terrence looked surprised. That takes courage, Elliot said. You didn't have to fix it. You just needed to acknowledge it. And you did. Then Elliot looked at Eduardo. You spoke up, not to protect me, but because it was the right thing to do. That means more than you realize. Eduardo nodded, clearly moved. Honestly, I thought I'd get in trouble, he admitted. Elliot smiled faintly. Maybe at another bank. Not this one. He turned back to the group. Some of you said nothing. I understand. It's hard to speak up when someone above you is doing wrong. Most people freeze. But I want you to remember this. How you treat someone when you think they can't help you, that's the version of yourself the world remembers. No one blinked. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to save the day. But you do have to try. Every time someone walks through that door, they're trusting you with more than money. They're trusting you not to humiliate them, not to make them feel small. Judith, standing quietly on the side, wiped a tear from her eye. Elliot took a breath. Megan lost her job today. Not because of me, but because she showed something inside herself that shouldn't exist in a place built on trust. He scanned the room one last time. This branch can be better. You can set the tone. You can create a place where no one ever questions if they belong. That choice isn't mine. It's yours. Brian cleared his throat and stepped forward. I think we all needed to hear that, sir. Elliot nodded slowly. Let's hope you take it to heart. He started wheeling himself toward the front doors. No applause followed, no grand gestures, just the quiet hum of people absorbing what they'd just witnessed. But as he reached the lobby entrance, something unexpected happened. Someone stepped forward, not as an employee or a client, but as a person. It was Clarence Duval, the janitor. 65 years old, slow-moving, always in early before the staff punched in. Most people barely noticed him unless he was pushing a mop or emptying bins. Elliot turned slightly in his chair. Sir, Clarence said, nodding once, I just want to thank you for how you handled this. Elliot smiled quietly. And what's your name? Clarence Duval. Pleasure to meet you, Clarence. Clarence looked down, then back up. I've worked at this branch since it opened, maybe 30 years or more. I've seen people come and go. I've seen folks get promoted who didn't know how to look others in the eye. He didn't say Megan's name, but he didn't have to. His voice wavered slightly. I've cleaned up after people who thought they were too good to say hello. That kind of thing sticks with a man. Elliot nodded slowly. Respect doesn't come from a title, does it? No, sir, Clarence replied firmly. It sure doesn't. Terrence stood near the teller's station, still watching everything unfold like he'd stumbled into a story he wasn't expecting to be part of. The woman from Loans stepped forward hesitantly. I didn't know what to say earlier, but I saw what happened, and I should have said something. Elliot looked at her kindly. Now you have. She seemed surprised, as if expecting to be scolded rather than acknowledged. Then there was the quiet shuffle of chairs. A few clients began gathering their things, whispering goodbyes, but no one rushed away. They lingered, as if trying to grasp the full weight of what they'd just witnessed. Near the door, Judith caught up with Elliot one more time. "If you ever decide to take a public-facing role," she said with a smile, "I'll be the first in line to vote for you." Elliot chuckled. "No campaign signs in my future." Judith leaned in a little. "That speech will stay with people. Let's hope their actions match it." Elliot nodded. Brian joined them near the door, holding a sealed envelope. "I drafted an apology letter from the branch, addressed to you personally," he said, "though I doubt it captures the full weight of today." Elliot took the envelope but didn't open it. "I'm not here for apologies," he said. "I'm here to see who this branch really is. And today, I saw it." Brian glanced over his shoulder at the staff. "We'll be better." "Don't. Tell me," Elliot replied. "Show me." They stood silently for a moment. Then Brian extended his hand. Elliot shook it. At the reception desk, Megan's absence was hard to miss. The empty chair, the untouched clipboard, a reminder of what had just unfolded. Elliot began wheeling toward the door, but before he could reach it, Terrence caught up. To him, a bit breathless. "Mr. Dandridge?" he asked nervously, rubbing his palms together. Elliot stopped. "I was wondering, would you be willing to come back? Not to inspect us or anything like that, but to speak to the new hires, or even the interns? I think a lot of people could really benefit from hearing you speak again, Elliot." Elliot hesitated. "That's not really my role, son." Terrence quickly replied, "I know, but I believe it matters." There was something in Terrence's voice, not flattery, not obligation, just genuine belief, that made Elliot pause. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Terrence nodded gratefully. "Thank you for today." As the automatic doors slid open, sunlight poured into the lobby. Once more, Elliot rolled forward, and a woman, a client, stepped up to hold the door for him. Not because he needed help, not because she had to, but simply because it was the decent thing to do. Elliot looked up at her. She smiled warmly and said, "Have a good day, sir." "You too," he replied softly. He moved through the doors, down the ramp, and into the quiet parking lot. Though he disappeared from view, everyone inside the branch felt that something had shifted, not just in policy, but in perspective. The branch remained hushed long after Elliot was gone. Brian stood with his arms crossed, watching the staff gradually return to their duties. There was no laughter, no casual chatter, no paper shuffling to break the silence. Only the sound of people realigning, reevaluating what they thought they knew about their workplace. In the break room, Terrence and Eduardo sat quietly, sipping from paper cups. Eduardo looked up and asked, "Have you ever seen anything like that?" Terrence shook his head. "Not in real life, only in movies. But this," Eduardo said slowly, "felt more real." "That's because it was," Terrence agreed. Down the hall, Clarence pushed his mop across the tile a little slower than usual. He paused by the front window and looked out, scanning the parking lot where Elliot had disappeared. He didn't smile, but there was a lightness in his expression, quiet satisfaction. Eventually, Brian returned to his office, still holding the envelope Elliot had left untouched. He placed it in a locked drawer, not to hide it, but because some things don't need to be displayed. They just need to be there. An hour passed. Then 2 clients came and went. Transactions resumed. Phones rang. On the surface, everything seemed back to normal. But it wasn't the same. Terrence now greeted each person at his counter with direct eye contact. The young woman from loans asked 3 times if her client needed anything else. Eduardo lingered, near the front desk longer than usual, not hovering, but watching. And Megan's absence echoed louder than any reprimand could have. By late afternoon, Judith had already called corporate to share an honest and respectful account of the day's events. "I've worked with Guardian State for years," she said, "over the phone, and today I saw something I hope they never forget." Your people don't need more training. They need more listening. That quote quietly circulated through the upper offices. Back at the branch, the teenager who'd come in with his mom that morning returned after school holding a $5 bill. He walked up to the counter where Terrence stood and said, "I just wanted to say I thought that guy was cool. I liked how he didn't yell." Terrence smiled. "Me too." The boy looked at the deposit slip in his hand. "I want to open an account here." Terrence handed him a pen. "Best decision you'll make today." In that simple moment, a kid and a bank employee, the mood of the day found its purpose. It wasn't about who got fired or who gave the best speech. It was about something smaller, something rooted in dignity. Outside, the sun began to set. The glass walls of the bank caught the golden light, casting long shadows across the lobby. Clarence switched off the floor buffer. Eduardo locked his drawer. Terrence double-checked the counters. Then Brian stepped to the center of the lobby, looked around, and spoke softly. "Let's make sure we never need a reminder like this again." No one answered aloud, but they all heard him. In a place where words had carried so much weight, that day silence finally felt earned, because true power doesn't need to shout. And character shows itself when no one is watching. This wasn't just a story about a man in a wheelchair or a rude employee. It was a story about perception, about what happens when people reveal who they really are. In a world where kindness often takes a back seat to status, Elliot Dandridge reminded everyone that real power doesn't demand recognition. It observes, listens, and when the time is right, it teaches. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you reflect, sit with that feeling. And if it made you realize how important it is to treat people well more than what's on your resume, then do something about it. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories that make us pause, think, and maybe, just maybe, become a little better.